Hello, and welcome back to Baby Elias's Stories. We now return to America is in the Heart, a Personal History by Carlos Bulosan, Part 2. Chapter 16. I began to be afraid, riding alone in the freight train. I wanted suddenly to go back to Stockton and look for a job in the tomato fields, but the train was already traveling fast. I was in flight again, away from an unknown terror that seemed to follow me everywhere. Dark flight into another place toward other enemies. But there was a clear sky and the night was ablaze with stars. I could still see the faint haze of Stockton's lights in the distance, a halo arching above it and fading into a backdrop of darkness. In the early morning, the train stopped a few miles from Niles, in the midst of a wide grape field. The grapes had been harvested and the bare vines were falling to the ground. The apricot trees were leafless. 3 railroad detectives jumped out of a car and ran toward the boxcars. I ran to the vineyard and hid behind a smudge spot, waiting for the next train from Stockton. A few bunches of grapes still hung on the vines, so I filled my pockets and ran for the tracks when the train came. It was a freight and it stopped to pick up carloads of grapes. When it started moving again, the empties were full of men. I crawled to a corner of a car and fell asleep. When I awakened, the train was already in San Jose. I jumped outside and found another freight going south. I swung aboard and found several hobos drinking cans of beer. I sat and watched them sitting solemnly as though there were no more life left in the world. They talked as though there were no more happiness left, as though life had died and would not live again. I could not converse with them, and this barrier made me a stranger. I wanted to know them and to be a part of their life. I wondered what I had in common with them beside the fact that we were all on the road rolling to unknown destinations. When I reached Salinas, I walked to town and went to a Mexican restaurant on Soledad Street. I was drinking coffee when I saw the same young girl who had disappeared in the night. She was passing by with an old man. I ran to the door and called to her, but she did not hear me. I went back to my coffee wondering what would become of her. I avoided the Chinese gambling houses, remembering the tragedy in Stockton. Walking on the dark side of the street as though I were hunted, I returned eagerly to the freight yards. I found the hobos sitting gloomily in the dark. I tried a few times to jump into the boxcars, but the detectives chased me away. When the freights had gone, the detectives left. Then, an express from San Francisco came and stopped to pick up a few passengers. The hobos darted out from the dark and ran to the rods. When I realized that I was the only one left, I grabbed the rod between the coal car and the car behind it. Then the express started, gathering speed as it nosed its way through the night. I almost fell several times. The strong, cold wind lashed sharply at my face. I put the crook of my arm securely about the rod, pinching myself when I feared that I was going to sleep. It was not yet autumn and the sky was clear, but the wind was bitter and sharp and cut across my face like a knife. When my arm went to sleep, I beat it to life with my fist. It was the only way I could save myself from falling to my death. I was so exhausted and stiff with the cold when I reached San Luis Obispo that I could scarcely climb down. I stumbled when I reached the ground, rolling over on my stomach as though I were headless. Then I walked to town where I found the Filipino who took me in his car to Pismo Beach. The Filipino community was a small block near the sea, a block of pool rooms, gambling houses, and little green cottages where prostitutes were doing business. At first, I did not know what the cottages were, but I saw many Filipinos going into them from the gambling houses nearby. Then I guessed what they were because cottages such as these were found in every Filipino community. I went into one of the cottages and sat in the warm little parlor where the Filipinos were waiting their turn to go upstairs. Some of the prostitutes were sitting awkwardly in the men's laps, wheedling them. Others were dancing cheek to cheek, swaying their hips suggestively. The Filipinos stood around whispering lustily in their dialects. The girls were scantily dressed and one of them was nude. The nude girl put her arms around me and started cooing lasciviously. I was extricated from her by the same Filipino who had taken me into his car in San Luis Obispo. He came into the house and immediately took the girl upstairs. In 10 minutes, he was down again and asked me if I would like to ride with him to Lombok. I had heard of the place when I was in Seattle, so naturally I was interested. We started immediately and in about 2 hours had passed through Santa Maria. Beyond the town, at a railroad crossing, highway patrolmen stopped our car. Speaking to me in our dialect, Doro, my companion, said, "These bastards probably want to see if we have a white woman in the car." "Why?" I asked him, becoming frightened. "They think every Filipino is a pimp," he said. "But there are more pimps among them than among all the Filipinos in the world put together. I will kill one of these bastards someday." They questioned Doro curtly, peered into the car and told us to go on. I came to know afterward that in many ways it was a crime to be a Filipino in California. I came to know that the public streets were not free to my people. We were stopped each time these vigilant patrolmen saw us driving a car. We were suspect each time we were seen with a white woman. And perhaps it was this narrowing of our life into an island, into a filthy segment of American society that had driven Filipinos like Doro inward, hating everyone and despising all positive urgencies toward freedom. When we reached the mountains to the right of the highway, we turned toward them and started climbing slowly, following the road that winds around them like a taut ribbon. We had been driving for an hour when we reached the summit, and suddenly the town of Lompok shone like a constellation of stars in the deep valley below. We started downward, hearing the strong wind from the sea beating against the car. Then we came to the edge of the town, and the church bells began ringing somewhere near a forest. It was the end of the flower season, so the Filipino workers were all in town. They stood on the sidewalks and in front of Japanese stores, showing their fat rolls of money to the girls. Gambling was going on in one of the old buildings in the Mexican district, and in a cafe across the street, Mexican girls and Filipinos were dancing. I went inside the cafe and sat near the counter, watching the plump girls dancing drunkenly. I noticed a small Filipino sitting forlornly at one of the tables. He was smoking a cigar and spitting like a big man into an empty cigar box on the floor. When the jukebox stopped playing, he jumped to the counterman for some change. He put the nickels in the slot, waving graciously to the dancers, although he never danced himself. Now and then a Filipino would go into the back room where the gamblers were playing cards and cursing loudly. The forlorn Filipino went to the counter again and asked for change. He put all the nickels in the slot and bought several packages of cigarettes. He threw the cigarettes on the table near the jukebox and then called to the old Mexican men who were sitting around the place. The Mexicans rushed for the table, grabbing the cigarettes. The Filipino went out, lighting another big cigar. I followed him immediately. He walked slowly and stopped now and then to see if I was following him. There was some mysterious force in him that attracted me. When he came to a large neon sign which said Landstrom Cafe, he stopped and peered through the wide front window. Then he entered a side door and climbed the long stairs. I opened the door quietly and entered. I heard him talking to a man in one of the rooms upstairs. When I reached the landing, a hard blow fell on my head. I rolled on the floor. Then I saw him with a gun in his hand, poised to strike at my head again. Standing behind him was my brother, Amado, holding a long-bladed knife. I scrambled to my feet, screaming, "Brother, it is me! It is Alos! Remember?" My brother told his friend to stop. He came near me, walking around me suspiciously. He stepped back and folded the blade of the knife. There was some doubt in his face. "I am your brother," I said again, holding back the tears in my eyes. "I am Alos. Remember the village of Mangusmana? Remember when you beat our carabao in the rain, when you touched my head and then ran to Binalonan? Remember, Amado?" I was not only fighting for my life, but also for a childhood bond that was breaking. Frantically, I searched in my mind for other remembrances of the past, which might remind him of me and re-establish a bridge between him and my childhood. "Remember when I fell from the coconut tree and you were a janitor in the Presidencia?" I said. "And you brought some magazines for me to read? Then you went away to work in the sugar plantations of Bulacan?" "If you are really my brother, tell me the name of our mother," he said casually. "Our mother's name is Meteria," I said. "That is what the people call her, but her real name is Otilia Sampayan. We used to sell salted fish and salt in the village, remember?" My brother grabbed me affectionately, and for a long time he could not say a word. I knew then that he had loved my mother, although he had had no chance to show it to her. Yes, to him and to me afterward, to know my mother's name was to know the password into the secrets of the past, into childhood and pleasant memories, but it was also a guiding star, a talisman, a charm that lights us to manhood and decency. "It has been so long, Alos," Amado said at last. "I had almost forgotten you. Please, forgive me, brother." "My name is Alfredo," said his friend. "I nearly killed you." He laughed guiltily, putting the gun in his pocket. "Yes, I almost killed you, Alos." My brother opened the door of their room. It was a small room with one broken chair and a small window facing the street. Their clothes were hanging on a short rope that was strung between the door and a cracked mirror. I sat on the edge of the bed waiting for my brother to speak. Alfredo started playing solitaire on the table, laughing whenever he cheated himself. "Go out in the hall and wash your hands," said my brother. "Then we will go downstairs for something to eat. Where is your suitcase?" "I don't have any now," I said. "I lost it when I was in Seattle." "Have you been in Seattle?" he asked. "I have been in Alaska too," I said, "and other places." "You should have written to me," he said. "You shouldn't have come to America, but you can't go back now. You can never go back, Alos." I could hear men shouting in a bar 2 blocks down the street. Then church bells started ringing again, and the wind from the sea carried their message to the farmhouses in the canyon near the river. I knew that as long as there was a hope for the future somewhere, I would not stop trying to reach it. I looked at my brother and Alfredo and knew that I would never stay with them to rot and perish in the world of brutality and despair. I knew that I wanted something which would ease my fear and stop my flight from dawn to dawn. "Life is tough, Carlos," said my brother. "I had a good job for some time, but the depression came. I had to do something. I had to live, Carlos." I did not know what he was trying to tell me, but I noticed that he had started using my Christian name. I noticed too that he spoke to me in English. His English was perfect. Alfredo's English was perfect also, but his accent was still strong. Alfredo tried to speak the way my brother spoke, but his uncultured tongue twisted ridiculously about in his mouth, and the words did not come out right. "We are in the bootleg racket," said my brother. "Alfredo and I will make plenty of money, but it is dangerous." "I like money," Alfredo said. "It is everything." They spoke with cynicism, but there was a grain of wisdom in their words. We were driving a borrowed car toward a farmhouse, away from the flower fields that made Lompok famous. We drove across a dry river and into a wide orchard. Then Alfredo knocked on the door. An Italian came to the door and told us to follow him into the backyard. "How many bottles do you want?" he asked my brother, starting to dig under a eucalyptus tree. "I think I can sell 2 dozen, said Amado. "The big size?" asked the Italian. "The big size," Alfredo said. The Italian looked at me suspiciously. When he had all the bottles ready, Amado paid him, and the Italian opened a small bottle and passed it around to us. I refused to drink, and Alfredo laughed. Then we went to the car and drove carefully to town. They disappeared with the bottles, peddling their bootleg whiskey in gambling houses and places of questionable reputation. They were boisterous when they entered the room, throwing their money on the bed and talking excitedly. They were disappointed when I told them that I wanted to go to Los Angeles. "Don't you want to go into business with us?" Alfredo asked me. "Maybe I will come back someday," I said. "Well, I was hoping you would want to begin early," he said. There was a note of genuine disappointment in his voice. He put some money in my pocket. "Here is something for you to remember me by." "If you would like to go to school," said my brother in parting, "just let me know. But whatever you do, Carlos, don't lose your head. Goodbye." I sat in the bus and watched them walking toward the Mexican district. I wanted to cry because my brother was no longer the person I had known in Binalonan. He was no longer the gentle, hard-working janitor in the Presidencia. I remembered the time when he had gone to Lingayen to cook for my brother Macario. Now he had changed and I could not understand him anymore. "Please, God, don't change me in America," I said to myself, looking the other way so that I would not cry. Chapter 17. I reached Los Angeles in the evening. An early autumn rain was falling. I waited in the station, looking around, looking among the passengers for Filipino faces. Then I went out and turned northward on Los Angeles Street, and suddenly familiar signs on barber shops and restaurants came to view. I felt as though I had discovered a new world. I entered a restaurant and heard the lonely sound of my dialect, the soft staccato sound of home. I knew at once that I would meet some people I had known in the Philippines. I sat on one of the stools and waited. I saw 3 American girls come in with 3 Filipinos. I thought I knew one of the Filipinos, so I approached him and spoke in Ilocano. But he did not understand me. Even when I spoke in Pangasinan, he did not understand me. He was of another tribe, possibly a Visayan. "If you are looking for your brother," said the proprietor to me, "go to the dance hall. That is where you always find them." I asked him to direct me. It was still early, but the girls were already arriving. They went hastily up the stairs and their perfume lingered after them. I stood outside for a long time, watching through the door until the guard closed it. Filipinos started going inside, putting their hands high above their heads so that the guard could search them for concealed weapons. The guard was a white man, and he was very rough with them. I went to Main Street, turned to the north, and found the Mexican district. The sound of Spanish made me feel at home, and I mingled with the drunks and the jobless men. In the old plaza, some men were debating a political issue. A shaggy old man was preaching to a motley crowd. And farther down the street near Olvera Market, I saw little Mexican boys carrying shoe shine boxes. They were eating sunflower seeds and throwing the empty shells into each other's faces. It was now getting late. The crowd in the street was dispersing. The bells in the church tower began to ring. I looked up and saw devotees coming out of the door. It was already 10 o'clock and the night services were over. The haggard preacher in the plaza leaped from his perch and disappeared in the crowd. I sat on a wooden bench and put my cap over my face so that I could sleep in the glare of the street lamps. Toward midnight, a drunk came to my bench and lay down to sleep. I moved away from him, giving him enough space to be comfortable. Then a young Mexican whose voice sounded like a girl's sat beside me. He put his hand on my knee and started telling me about a place where we could get something to eat. I was hungry and cold, but I was afraid of him. I walked away from him, watching the church across the street. When I was sure no one was looking, I rushed to the door and entered. The church was empty. I went to a comfortable corner and lay on the floor. I saw an old man with a white beard coming in the door, and I thought he saw me. But he went to the candles and blew them out one by one, then disappeared through a side door. It was like heaven. It was so warm and quiet and comfortable. I closed my eyes and went to sleep. I was awakened in the morning by the merry peals of tiny bells. I ran across the room and through the door, bumping into many people who were arriving for the morning services. I walked in the crowded street toward the Filipino district. I felt as though a beast were tearing at the walls of my stomach. The pain nauseated me. I was hungry again. I thought I saw my brother Macario in a streetcar. I jumped on with all the power of my legs, but I was wrong. I got out on the next block and started walking aimlessly. I began to wonder if my life would always be one long flight from fear. When had I landed in America? It seemed so long ago. I crossed the green lawn of the new City Hall. I walked from Main Street to Vermont Avenue, 3 miles away. I returned to town by streetcar and went to First Street again. A Filipino pool room was crowded, and I went inside to sit on a bench. The players were betting, and once in a while they would give the table boy a dime. I waited until the men started coming in groups because their day's work was done. I was talking to a gambler when 2 police detectives darted into the place and shot a little Filipino in the back. The boy fell on his knees, face up, and expired. The players stopped for a moment, agitated, then resumed playing, their faces coloring with fear and revolt. The detectives called an ambulance, dumped the dead Filipino into the street, and left when an internee and his assistant arrived. They left hurriedly, untouched by their act, as though killing were a part of their day's work. All at once I heard many tongues speaking excitedly. They did not know why the Filipino was shot. It seemed that the victim was new in the city. I was bewildered. "Why was he shot?" I asked a man near me. "They often shoot Pinoys like that," he said, "without provocation. Sometimes when they have been drinking and they want to have fun, they come to our district and kick or beat the first Filipino they meet." "Why don't you complain?" I asked. "Complain?" he said. "Are you kidding? Why, when we complain, it always turns out that we attack them. And they become more vicious, I am telling you. That is why once in a while a Pinoy shoots a detective. You will see it one of these days." "If they beat me, I will kill them," I said. The Filipino looked at me and walked away. As the crowd was beginning to disperse, I saw the familiar head of my brother Macario. He was entering the pool room with a friend. I rushed to him and touched his hand. He could not believe that I was in America. "Why didn't you write that you were coming?" he asked. "I did not know I was coming, brother," I said. "Besides, I did not know your address. I knew that I would not stop traveling until I found you. You have grown older." "I guess I have, all right," he said. Then suddenly he became quiet, as though he were remembering something. He looked at me and said, "Let's go to my hotel." I noticed that he did not speak English the way he used to speak it in the Philippines. He spoke more rapidly now. As I walked beside him, I felt that he was afraid I would discover some horror that was crushing his life. He was undecided what to do when we reached Broadway Street and stopped several times in deep thought. He had changed in many ways. He seemed in constant agitation, and he smoked one cigarette after another. His agitation became more frightening each minute. "Why was the Filipino shot?" I asked, pretending not to notice his mental anguish. "Someday you will understand, Carlos," he said. Carlos. He had changed my name too. Everything was changing. Why? And why all this secrecy about the death of one Filipino? Were the American people conspiring against us? I looked at my brother sidelong, but said nothing. Suddenly I felt hungry and lonely and tired. We turned to the north and came to a hotel near the Hall of Justice building. We took the slow elevator to the 5th floor. My brother knocked on the door and looked at me. There was a haunted look in his face. I heard many voices inside, a patter of feet. Then the door opened. The strong smell of whiskey brought tears to my eyes. It was so strong it almost choked me. I knew at once that there was a party. I saw 3 American girls in evening gowns and 10 Filipinos. I was amazed at their immaculate suits and shoes. "Friends," my brother announced. "This is my kid brother, Carlos. He has just arrived from the Philippines." "More than 6 months ago," I corrected them. "I went to Alaska first, then came down to Los Angeles. I think I like it here. I will buy a house here someday." "Buy a house?" a man near me said, his face breaking into a smile. But when he noticed that my brother was looking hard at him, he suddenly changed his tone and offered me a glass. "Good, good," he said. "Buy all the houses you want, and if you need a janitor..." He turned around to hide the cynical twist of his mouth. Then they rushed to me. All at once, several cocktail glasses were offered to me. The girls pulled me to the table, tilting a glass in my mouth. The Filipinos shouted to me to drink. I looked at my brother ashamed. "I don't drink," I said. "Go on, drink!" A curly-haired boy prodded me. "Drink like hell! This is America! We all drink like hell! Go on, boy!" He was only a boy, but he drank like a man. I watched him empty 3 glasses, one after the other. My brother came to me. "This is a wedding party," he whispered. "Who got married?" I asked, looking around. "I think that one," he said, pointing to a woman. "That is the man. I think he is 20 years old." "She is old enough to be his mother," I said. What is the difference?" the curly-haired boy said to me. "They know what they want, don't they?" He winked at me foolishly and emptied another glass. I gripped the glass in my hand so hard that it nearly broke. It was past midnight when the party was over. I thought some of the men would go home, but it was only Leon who announced that he was leaving. The bridal couple started undressing in the other room, and the other men came to the outer room with the 2 girls. The curly-haired boy switched off the lights, and the men started grabbing the girls. I could see the red glow of their cigarettes moving in the dark. The girls would protest for a while, cursing the men. Then they would quiet down and go to bed, laughing yokily when they threw their gowns on the floor. My brother took my arm and told me to follow him. We walked silently through the hall and down the stairs. I heard the married woman squealing and laughing, and I was bewildered and afraid. I wanted my brother to explain everything to me. The sky was overcast and the lights in the streets were out. Newsboys were shouting the morning papers. We walked for hours because it was hard to talk. We had not seen each other for years, and it was difficult to begin. We could only pick up fragments of our lives and handle them fearfully, as though the years had made us afraid to know ourselves. I was suddenly ashamed that I could not express the gentle feeling I had for my brother. Was this brutality changing me too? At dawn, we walked back to the hotel. What I saw in the room would come back to me again and again. One of the girls was in the bed with two men. The other girl was on the couch with two other men. They were all nude. 6 men were sleeping on the floor and 3 others were sprawled under the bed. My brother motioned me to undress, switching off the lights. I found a space near the closet and I lay down, hoping to sleep. My heart was pounding very fast. Leon came into the room with another girl. He cursed the sleeping forms and took the girl to the other room. They went to bed with the married couple. I wanted to talk to my brother in the dark, but when I put my ear close to his mouth, I knew that he was already asleep. I could not sleep anymore. My mind was wandering. I rolled over on my other side and tried to remember a prayer I used to recite when I was a little boy in Mangusmana. A man named Nick was the first to wake up. He was making coffee in a big pot when I went to the kitchen. The girls were still in bed. My brother woke up suddenly and went to the bathroom. He was fully dressed when he came out. "I'll look for a job today," he said. "There is no use," Nick said. "I have been looking for a job for 3 months." "I'll try anyway," said my brother. "Well, I hope some worker dies today," Nick said. My brother looked at me. The girls woke up. They walked unashamedly in the room. The other men came to the kitchen and began drinking whiskey again. It was then that I learned their names. Jose, the curly-haired boy, was Nick's brother. They had both been going to college some months before, but the depression had deprived them of their jobs. Mariano, with the well-trimmed mustache, had been an agent for a clothing company that had failed. Victor and Manuel had worked in an apartment house in Hollywood. Luz, long out of a job, had come from the farm to live in the city. Gazamen was the life of the party. He was always singing and playing his portable phonograph. Leon was selling tickets in a dance hall. He was the only one who had a job. Alonzo was a college student and had never worked as far as the other men knew. Ben was doing housework in Beverly Hills, but he seldom came home with money. I found my brother Macario in a strange world. I could stand the poverty and hunger, but this desperate cynicism disturbed me. Were these Filipinos revolting against American society in this debased form? Was there no hope for them? One night, Leon, who was the sole mainstay of our company, came home with a bottle of bootleg whiskey. He brought a girl with him. She was small and dark. Suddenly, in the middle of the night, the girl started screaming. We rushed to the other room, but it was too late. Leon was dead and cold. The girl cried loudly and hysterically. Mariano struck her with his fist, felling her. The blow was so hard it stunned her. It was not that he hated her. It was that this was the sad end of a little world that had revolved around a man who sold tickets in a dance hall. Chapter 18. When Leon died, the proprietor gave us notice. Mariano's girl went away with him to Santa Barbara where, for reasons I did not know at the time, they were driven out by the police. They went to Lompoc, and Mariano, hoping to make a fresh start, started working in the pea fields. The girl stayed in the house where several other Filipino farmhands were living. Then she ran away with one of them to Delano, where she became a professional prostitute. Mariano, disgusted and bitter, left the farm and went to town, entering a career of crime that drove him to the very edge of insanity. Nick's girl, Rola, graduated from college and took up teaching. And after a while, she refused to see him. Nick moved with my brother Macario and me to Hope Street, in the red light district, where pimps and prostitutes were as numerous as the stars in the sky. It was a noisy and tragic street, where suicides and murders were a daily occurrence, but it was the only place in the city where we could find a room. There was no other district where we were allowed to reside, and even when we tried to escape from it, we were always driven back to this narrow island of despair. I often wondered if I would be able to survive it, if I would be able to escape from it unscathed, and if the horrors in it would not shadow my whole life. Manuel married a white girl from Oklahoma, who had been married at 12 and had had 2 children. Her mother, 2 older sisters, and a brother came to live with them. Manuel was a janitor in a big apartment house in Hollywood, but his $60 a month was not enough to support a large family. He was doing the work of 2 men, and slowly his health gave way and he went to a hospital with tuberculosis. His wife gave birth to a baby girl and lived with Victor, running away from him in Salinas to live with a farm labor contractor. Afterwards, she was stabbed to death by a Filipino gambler, and her children, fatherless and without support, were put in a state orphanage. Luz found a Mexican woman in the street one cold night and took her to our room. Jose and my brother Macario were sleeping in a small bed, but Nick and I were together on a couch near the door. When Luz and his woman came into the room, Nick spread a blanket on the floor and told me to sleep with him. I cursed the cold night and the hard floor. Luz and his woman made love all night. The woman was very drunk and she screamed and laughed alternately, depending on what they were doing. Now and then Jose, who was constantly cursing, threw something at them. Once Luz went to the bathroom in the hall, leaving the door open. Jose, seizing his opportunity, jumped into the couch where Luz's woman was waiting. I got up hurriedly and bolted the door, hoping to avoid the scene. Luz started pounding on the door, shouting threats to the woman. The tenants came out into the hall and shouted to him to stop. Nick jumped to his feet and opened the door, but Jose was already back in his bed, feigning innocence, when Luz switched on the lights to see which one among us had gone to his woman. I almost died within myself. I died many deaths in these surroundings where man was indistinguishable from beast. It was only when I had died 100 times that I acquired a certain degree of immunity to sickening scenes such as took place this night. That I began to look at our life with Nick's cold cynicism. Yet I knew that our decadence was imposed by a society alien to our character and inclination, alien to our heritage and history. It took me a long time then to erase the outward scars of these years, but the deep invisible scars inside me are not wholly healed and forgotten. They jarred my equilibrium now and then, and always when I came face to face with brutality, I was afraid of what I would do to myself and to others. I was terribly afraid of myself, for it was the beast, the monster, the murderer of love and kindness that would raise its dark head to defy all that was good and beautiful in life. It was then I would cry out for the resurrection of my childhood. Not long afterward, Luz died in a gambling house. He was playing at a card table when suddenly he collapsed, clutching desperately at the man near him. Then he tore at his tongue and died. His woman, the Mexican, went into prostitution on Central Avenue in the Negro district and died of syphilis. Luz's death was one of the many tragedies that hardened me and drove me into a world of corruption that almost wrecked my whole life. Alonzo, the student, met a divorcee who sent him to college, but one night, when they were living together, they could not marry in the state. Detectives broke into their apartment and took Alonzo to jail. "You can't do this to me," he kept saying. "I know my rights. I haven't committed any crime." "Listen to the brown monkey talk," said one of the detectives, slapping Alonzo in the face. "He thinks he has the right to be educated. Listen to the bastard talk English. He thinks he is a white man. How do you make this white woman stick with you? Goo goo. Another sharp slap across the face, and Alonzo, staggering from the blow, fell on the floor. Blood came out of his mouth, dripping on the threadbare carpet. He rolled away from the detective when he saw that a kick was coming, jumped to his feet and ran outside where two others felled him with blackjacks. He was carried downstairs to a car that took him to jail. It was the turning point of Alonzo's life. The divorcee was driven out of town, warned never to see Filipinos again. And Alonzo, when he came out, went back to college with a great determination, majoring in languages and international law. Years afterward in the Philippines, he became a bitter exponent of an anti-American campaign, fighting his crusade through the nation's press. He was another who conditioned my thinking, who affected my social attitudes. I thought there was no hope for Filipino unity in the United States, so I fought the way Alonzo fought against injustice and intolerance. But our lease on the small room on Hope Street was about to expire. My brother Macario had pawned his only suit so that he walked in the streets in a torn jacket. Nick sold all his books and an overcoat, but Jose still had his suitcase and a typewriter. When we had sold everything and were still unemployed, I knew that we would soon separate. I knew that I must again hurl myself against a wall of destruction. One day, my brother and I walked to a splendid street near Wilshire Boulevard, asking the apartment managers for work for us to do. My brother walked on one side of the street while I walked on the other, but it was futile, and we were tired from walking so long. We jumped into a waiting bus and two Negro laborers followed us. We did not drop any money in the slot. The Negroes took the blame. I felt ashamed, but it was another lesson. The persecuted were always the first victims of misunderstanding. We got off on a street of many new houses. My brother walked on one side of the street again and I walked on the other. I asked the people in the beautiful houses if they had rugs to be cleaned. I was about to give up when my brother came running out of an alley and told me that he found something for us to do. We walked into the backyard of a large house and a servant told us to pick up all the rugs. My brother took off his jacket and rolled up his trousers, beating the rugs vigorously with a broom. When we had beaten the rugs and had put them in their proper places, the woman of the house came down and gave us 50 cents each. 50 cents for 8 hours' work? Macario said. What more do you want? Said the lady, slamming the door. Bang! The days of hunger and loneliness came. Aching hunger and stifling loneliness. Every dawn was the opening of a cavern of starvation and exile from the touch of friendly hands, of friendly voices, and every hour was a blow against the senses, dulling all impulses toward decency. You must be strong in America, said my brother to me one day. He was frying chopped oxtails he had bought at the Central Market for 10 cents. I'll get a job and go to school. In 2 years, I'll be able to return to the Philippines. Wait and see. I did not understand him, but I knew that I could not wait for those 2 years to pass. I was afraid to wait for another day. I wanted to be strong because he was my brother, but it was like our life in Binalonan again. I went to the unemployment agencies, but every job in the list was taken. The agencies sold jobs to the highest bidder. I did not have the money to compete with them. Then the manager of the hotel closed our room, locking our few remaining belongings inside. Macario and I slept in the 5-cent theaters on Main Street, where the jobless and other denizens of the city slept. I could hardly stand the stifling filth of the men and the monstrous rats that ran over our feet when the lights went out. But it was cold outside, and there was no place to go, and no food to appease the hunger that was gnawing at my vitals as viciously as the rats in the theater. One day Nick found some money in the street. He happened to be following a woman when he saw her purse fall. He ran for it and grabbed the money. When the woman claimed that it was her money, Nick argued that he had found it and ran off defiantly. It was a beastly struggle for existence in a cold city. Gaza men who had come back from his foxhole found a cheap rooming house on Wall Street in the Mexican district. He was always disappearing, and when he appeared again, we had music. He was our song of praise. It was only when melancholia attacked him that we went away, leaving us to wonder what would happen to him. The room was small, no bathroom, no closet, no window. The washroom was outside in the hall, where the other tenants hung their washing. One tenant, an old man, had a small icebox in his room. Jose climbed through the window and pried open the icebox, which was padlocked on both doors. He found only a rotten piece of barracuda, but the old man raved as if he had lost $1,000. Jose ate the fish, but he could not sleep for the pain in his stomach. One evening, my brother came to our room with a sickly Filipino who looked as though he had not eaten for weeks. His name was Esteban, and when he saw the food on the table, he fell upon it like a dog. It was only when he had emptied all the plates that he began to talk, banging on the table with his fist when he wished to emphasize a point. "I haven't become a writer in America in vain," he shouted. "Someday, my friends, I will write a great book about the Ilocano peasants in northern Luzon." "When are you going to write it?" Jose interrupted him. Esteban looked at Jose silently, then ignoring him, he continued. "The man of our generation, the person who shall direct the course of our history for the next 50 years will come from the peasantry, and this I know." He looked defiantly at Jose. "Will be the turning point of my life. I will be the greatest writer of my time." "Has he written anything?" I asked my brother. "He has written stories and essays, but has not published anything," said Macario. "The poor fellow. He is starving." Poor Esteban. He was the first writer I knew, but the fire was dying in him, eating away at his vitals. 2 days afterward, he jumped out of the window, out of his room. 2 days afterward, he jumped out of the window of his room. I rushed to the hotel with my brother and found stacks of unpublished manuscripts in an old suitcase. I took one story which was titled Morning in Narvacan, a poetic recitation describing a peasant town in northern Luzon. I carried it with me for years, reading it again a decade after, when I was intellectually equipped to understand the significance of Esteban's tragic death and the merit of the story. Thus it was that I began to rediscover my native land and the cultural roots there that had nourished me, and I felt a great urge to identify myself with the social awakening of my people. Nick paid our whole month's rent, which was $10 for the 5 of us in the small room, but one night Jose came to our room with a Mexican girl and asked for the rest of Nick's money. "I would like to have $25, Jose said to his brother, looking at the girl morosely. "What for?" Nick asked. "Lupe wants an abortion," Jose said. "Why don't you be careful?" Nick shouted, but he knew that it was useless, that he would give the money. He handed it to Jose and looked down when the girl took it. That was the end of our money. But Jose was saved from marrying a girl he did not love. We were thrown into the streets again. Days of hunger and pain followed, and loneliness that clouded the mind plunged the consciousness into an impenetrable darkness. The nameless urge to seize something warm and tangible, to clutch it to me, that this void inside of me might be filled. My brother and I were sitting in a barber shop when a friend told us about the job. Macario borrowed 20 cents from the barber and rushed to the place. Then he came back to tell me that he had been hired. Every Saturday night he came to town with $2 for me. He was working at the house of a movie director who paid him $25 a month for cooking and doing the general housework. The place was large and magnificent, and I asked myself why my brother was paid only that much for doing all the work in that great household. When I saw the lady of the house with her jewelry and perfume sitting in the house all day drinking expensive liquors and her fat husband smoking 50-cent cigars, I hated myself for accepting a part of my brother's hard-earned money. On the first night that I went with him to try to help him, he cooked something special and told me to wait on the table. He instructed me carefully. He was very patient. When the dinner was over, the guests went to the library. My brother came out of the kitchen and started serving their drinks. "Boy," said one of the men to my brother, "I enjoyed the dinner." "Thank you, sir," Macario said, smiled, bowed, and withdrew into the kitchen. "He is an educated servant," said the lady of the house. "He was a school teacher in the Philippines, and he went to college here." "You can hire these natives for almost nothing," said her husband. "They are only too glad to work for white folks." "You said it," one of the men said. "But I would rather have niggers and Chinamen. They don't have a college education, but they know their places." "And I won't have a Filipino in my house when my daughter is around," said one of the women. "Is it true that they are sex crazy?" the man next to her asked. "I understand that they go crazy when they see a white woman." "Same as the niggers," said the man who did not like Filipino servants. "Same as the Chinamen with their opium." "They are all sex-starved," said the man of the house with finality. "What is this country coming to?" one of the women said. I withdrew into the kitchen, where I found my brother silently cleaning glasses. I walked outdoors to the end of the road, returned to the house, and helped him put the house in order. It was past midnight when we finished the work. It seemed I had hardly slept 2 hours when the bell rang for breakfast. Macario rubbed his eyes sleepily and looked at the clock. Then he rushed to the kitchen and started preparing coffee and toast. He came back to the room and told me to carry the tray upstairs. The lady of the house was still in bed. She got up and went to the bathroom when she heard me knock on the door. She came back to the room without clothes, the red hair on her body gleaming with tiny drops of water. It was the first time I had seen the onion-like whiteness of the white woman's body. I stared at her, naturally, but looked away as fast as I could when she turned in my direction. She had caught a glimpse of my ecstasy in the tall mirror, where she was nakedly admiring herself. "What are you staring at?" she said. "Your body, madam," I said, and immediately regretted it. "Get out!" She pushed me into the hall and slammed the door. Boom! I did not forget her for a long time. Macario came to town the following weekend and tried to give me another $2, my weekly allowance for room rent, food, and other necessities. I refused. I knew that I had to go away. I was angered at Macario's subservience to these people. What had happened to him? What happened to the young man who had opened such a treasure house of knowledge for me? Jose came to my room and confided to me that he had to run away. It was another girl. My opportunity to escape the city presented itself. "I am going to Imperial Valley, where there is plenty of farm work," I said to my brother on the phone. "I will see you again when the season is over." "Be strong, Carlos," he said. I wanted to cry out to him. I could not tell him why I was running away. Not now. I could not bear to see him working for people who were less human and decent than he, and who believed because they were in the position to command that they could treat him as though he were a domestic animal. Jose and I went to the freight yards. I heard something shouting at the edge of my mind. "I will never let them touch me with their filthy hands. I will never let them make a domestic animal out of me." "What are you crying about?" Jose asked me. The cold wind lashing his words away.